The Union Pacific Big Boy gets all the glory, but the strongest locomotive ever built, the Chesapeake and Ohio Allegheny, beat it by every number that mattered: a heavier frame, more power, and a bigger firebox. There was just one catch. Being stronger turned out to be the worst thing possible. Its sheer weight crushed rails, bankrupted maintenance crews, and forced the railroad to cover up a disaster no one wanted to admit. So why was the greatest locomotive in history buried in shame while the Big Boy became an icon? To understand, we have to go back to the moment America needed unstoppable power and got more than it bargained for. In 1941, two railroads stared down the same mountain problem, but they saw completely different solutions. Out west, Union Pacific faced a crisis of speed. The United States was mobilizing for war, and the military demanded that troops and supplies move fast, straight over the Wasatch Mountains. Every hour mattered. Union Pacific's answer was a behemoth that could fly. A locomotive built to haul heavy freight at speeds up to 80 miles per hour, flattening grades that had once forced double-heading and delays. The Big Boy was not just a machine, it was a weapon in the arsenal of democracy, designed for velocity and volume. Meanwhile, in the coal-choked valleys of Appalachia, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad had an entirely different battle. Their world was not about speed, it was about weight, raw, unyielding tonnage. The East Coast's factories and cities ran on an endless river of bituminous coal, and the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad's job was to move mountains of it, day after day, over twisting, punishing grades. Their challenge was not to get there first. It was to get everything there, no matter how heavy, no matter how slow. Every winter, every blackout, every spike in demand pushed the limits of what a locomotive could drag up the New River and through the heart of West Virginia. So while Union Pacific called on Alco to build a fast giant for the open spaces and long grades of the West, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad turned to Lima Locomotive Works with a different demand. Build us a brute. They did not want elegance. They did not want a jack of all trades. They wanted a monster that could tear coal out of the mountains and drag it to the steel mills. The result was a machine as different from the Big Boy as the Appalachians are from the Rockies. A locomotive forged for endurance, not for speed. Two railroads, two philosophies, and two titans set on a collision course, not just of steel, but of purpose. Lima's answer to the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad's demand for brute force started with a radical choice: the 2-6-6-6 wheel arrangement. That string of numbers is not just railroad jargon, it is the blueprint for how the Allegheny could pull more coal than anything before it. Two leading wheels up front kept the locomotive steady as it entered curves. Then came two sets of 6 massive driving wheels, each set powered by its own steam cylinders. This articulated design let the Allegheny bend through the sharp, twisting tracks of Appalachia while still putting down immense power. But the real secret weapon sat at the back: 6 trailing wheels instead of the usual 4. Most steam giants, including the Big Boy, relied on a 4-wheel truck to support the firebox. Lima's engineers pushed further. They added an extra axle, creating a 6-wheel trailing truck just to carry the weight of a firebox unlike any other. This was not just a bigger box to burn more coal. It was a cavern stretching nearly 20 feet long with a volume of 592 cubic feet. The firebox's grate area, where the coal burned, measured 135.5 square feet, but it was the depth and volume that mattered most. The Allegheny could burn through mountains of coal at a rate no other locomotive could match, turning raw fuel into a flood of steam. This 6-wheel solution was more than a technical trick. It was a leap in design, allowing the Allegheny to generate power on a scale the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad had never seen. The locomotive's entire rear end was built around that firebox, with the 6 trailing wheels spreading the load and keeping the monster balanced. The result was not just a bigger engine, it was a machine built to conquer the limits of steam, using every inch of its frame to feed an insatiable appetite for coal and power. For the engineers at Lima, this was the frontier of steam technology, a calculated risk that promised unmatched strength on the rails. Numbers don't lie, and the Allegheny's numbers hit like a punch to the gut. On the dynamometer, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad's monster pulled a staggering 7,500 horsepower at the drawbar, more than any steam locomotive ever recorded in North America. The Union Pacific Big Boy, for all its fame, peaked at 6,200 horsepower during its own tests. That's a full 1,000 horsepower difference, not a rounding error. The Allegheny wasn't just a little stronger, it was in a different league. Weight? The scales tipped even further. With engine and tender combined, the Allegheny came in at about 1.2 million pounds, edging past the Big Boy at 1.18 million pounds. It was the heaviest reciprocating steam locomotive ever built. Every inch of its frame was loaded with steel, copper, and iron. The sheer mass was so great that when the Allegheny rolled into a yard, crews felt it in their boots. Test records from the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad's own dynamometer car bear this out. In 1945, engineers logged the 7,500 horsepower run at 45 miles per hour, signatures and all. It wasn't just a factory claim, it was a number etched into the railroad's own books. On paper, the Allegheny outmuscled the Big Boy, it outweighed it, and it outpowered it. For a moment in the 1940s, the crown of steam belonged to the East. The Allegheny was the king of raw power, and the numbers made it official. On paper, the Big Boy's great area, 150 square feet, looks like the clear winner. But the Allegheny's secret was not just in the width of its firebox, it was in the depth. Lima's engineers did not just stretch the firebox sideways. They built it taller and longer, pushing the limits of what could fit above the rails. That is why the six-wheel trailing truck mattered so much. It was not just there to hold up extra steel, it was the foundation that allowed the firebox to balloon out to 592 cubic feet of volume, over 200 more than the Big Boy. This extra space was not just a statistic on a blueprint. It meant the Allegheny could produce more power, burning coal at a rate no other locomotive could touch. The deeper firebed allowed for better combustion, hotter fires, and a faster rush of steam to the cylinders. On a cold morning in the Appalachians, that meant more power at the throttle, more tons behind the tender, and less time waiting for steam to build. For the crew in the cab, the difference was real. The Allegheny could swallow shovelfuls of coal and turn them into raw force almost instantly. The six-wheel truck was not a gimmick. It was the backbone of an engine designed to win the numbers game. In the world of steam, volume meant velocity, and the Allegheny's firebox gave it an edge that no other locomotive could match. That was the real genius of Lima's design, not just more, but better, where it counted most. Track crews along the Chesapeake and Ohio mainline quickly learned what the Allegheny's power meant for the ground beneath their boots. Every time one of these 1.2 million pound giants thundered by, the rails shuddered and the ties groaned. The numbers told the story. Each driving axle bore down with about 72,000 pounds, more than any other steam locomotive in America. The Big Boy, for all its size, spread its weight more evenly, and the Allegheny's brute force came at the price of concentrated punishment. Maintenance records from the Chesapeake and Ohio New River Division showed a sharp uptick in trouble wherever the Alleghenies ran. Tie replacement rates spiked, sometimes doubling compared to lines worked by older engines. Foreman's logbooks from 1945 to 1949 are peppered with notes about popped spikes and cracked wooden ties, especially after rain softened the ballast. Some crewmen started calling the H8 the Allegheny Anvil, not out of affection, but because it hammered the track relentlessly. The financial impact was just as real. On Allegheny-assigned routes, maintenance costs jumped by as much as 20 to 30%. Extra crews were needed to keep up with repairs, and supply sheds ran low on spikes and tie plates. The railroad's own accountants flagged these lines in annual reports, warning that the new engines were eating into profits. For the men who swung hammers and drove spikes, it was not theory, it was a daily battle to keep the rails under the monster in one piece. Inside the C&O headquarters, the mood soured as the true weight of the Allegheny became impossible to ignore. Procurement documents promised an engine weight of around 758,000 pounds, but when the first units rolled onto the scales, the needle climbed past 778,000 pounds. That is a difference of more than 20,000 pounds. An entire boxcar's worth of steel hidden in plain sight. Internal memos from the C&O mechanical department show a scramble for answers. Some managers accused Lima Locomotive Works of deliberately understating the numbers to secure the contract. Others wondered if the railroad's own inspectors had missed something during acceptance. The allegation was not just about pride. Every pound over spec meant higher wages for crews, since pay was tied to engine weight. It meant bridges and rails were pushed closer to their limits. It meant maintenance budgets had to stretch even further. Lima's official paperwork, still referenced in C&O correspondence years later, stuck to the original figures. But in the yards and shops, the truth was measured in bent rails and overtime slips. This breach of trust left a stain that never faded. The railroad had paid for a machine built to the edge of what their tracks could handle and got something heavier still. The weight discrepancy did not just strain the rails, it strained the relationship between builder and buyer. Behind closed doors, C&O executives debated legal action, but the war effort and the need for powerful engines kept the Alleghenies in service. The economic fallout would become clearer with every ton of coal burned and every mile of track repaired. Allegheny crews got their orders from the dispatcher, dragged 12,000 tons of coal out of the hollows and over the mountains. The engine could do it, but not the way it was meant to. Instead of letting the locomotive stretch its legs at 40 or 50 miles per hour, where its horsepower curve soared, the C&O kept it crawling. Coal drags moved at a steady 15 miles per hour, sometimes even less on the tightest curves. On paper, the Allegheny could burn through coal faster than any other steam engine. In practice, it burned through it wastefully. Efficiency charts from the era tell the story. At 40 miles per hour, the Allegheny delivered its full 7,500 horsepower, consuming about 2 pounds of coal per horsepower hour. But drop the speed to 15, and the numbers turned ugly. Steam drafting became inefficient, and combustion became incomplete. The same engine now needed more than 4 pounds of coal per horsepower hour. The result was that the Allegheny could burn twice as much coal per ton-mile as smaller, older engines doing the same job. Engineers in the cab knew what was happening. They watched the firemen shovel harder and the tender empty faster than any schedule could justify. Diaries from the time mentioned the frustration. An engine designed to run, forced to crawl, its power wasted in clouds of black smoke and heat pouring off the firebox. Some called it a Ferrari hitched to a coal cart. The numbers backed them up. On slow drags, the Allegheny turned into a coal hog, burning through money as quickly as it burned through fuel. Dispatchers kept the big engines on these slow trains because that is what the schedule demanded. The railroad needed brute strength, not speed, and the Allegheny was the only tool big enough for the job. But every mile run at the wrong pace meant higher costs, more coal, and less value from the most powerful locomotive in the country. The railroad's own accountants started to notice. When the time came to cut costs, the Allegheny's appetite put it at the top of the list for retirement. By the early 1950s, the Allegheny's fate was sealed. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, once proud of its coal-hauling champion, moved quickly to erase any trace of the £1.2 million experiment. In the space of just a few years, nearly every Allegheny was sent to the torch. Records from 1952 to 1956 show a steady stream of retirements, engines pulled from service, stripped of their brass, and cut down for scrap. Out of 60 built, only 2 escaped the cutter's torch. Number 1601 found its way to the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, where it stands silent, its rods and firebox frozen in time. Number 1604, after a brief stint as a display in a city park, was eventually preserved by the B&O Railroad Museum in Baltimore. Both are static, never to run again, their massive frames now monuments to ambition and miscalculation. Meanwhile, the Union Pacific Big Boy took a different path. Its name was chalked onto the smokebox by a shop worker, and it stuck. a legend was born. The big boy became the face of American steam, featured in magazines, model train catalogs, and newsreels. When dieselization swept the railroads, the big boys were retired with fanfare, not shame. Union Pacific kept several for display, and in 2019, number 4014 thundered back to life, restored to running condition and touring the country as a living piece of history. The contrast could not be starker. The Allegheny, once the most powerful steam locomotive in the world, was quietly dismantled and forgotten by the railroad that built it. The big boy became an icon, celebrated in museums and on the rails. In the end, only two Alleghenies remain, silent giants watched over by curators and rail fans who remember their brief reign. Their story lingers not in the roar of pistons, but in the hushed halls of museums where visitors stand in awe of what might have been. Today, only two Alleghenies remain, silent reminders that raw power without balance can doom even the mightiest designs. As technology races ahead, we still face the same lesson. Bigger isn't always better, and unchecked ambition has real costs. In every era, success hinges not just on strength, but on understanding true limits. What lines should we never cross? Let's talk below.